Well, earlier today, the Minister of Indigenous Services tabled a bill aimed at bringing clean drinking water to First Nations. Mandy Gulmasti says $4.6 billion over 5 years will be dedicated to improving water and wastewater systems in First Nation communities. She says the bill is working off of 6 years of consultations to ensure clean water on First Nations, something previous governments also tried to deliver. The CBC's Janice McGregor joins us now live from Ottawa with more on this. Hey, Janice. So this isn't exactly the same bill that was put forward by the previous government. Let's talk about some of the differences here.
That's right. This is a revival, if you will. C61 died when the election was called in the previous parliament. This bill, too, tries to deal with a fundamental inequity, the fact that First Nations communities do not have the same legally enforceable safe drinking water protections that other people who live in non-Indigenous jurisdictions in this country enjoy. They don't have wastewater standards, drinking water standards like a municipality or a province might enforce. So they have to deal with that legislative gap. But when they get into the nitty-gritty of how to do this and how many rights to enshrine in the legislation, that's where you start to see some nuances, especially when you compare it to the previous approach. Now, rather than enshrining safe drinking water as a right, the bill is going to, and this is their words, advance the progressive realization of the internationally recognized right to safe drinking water. The minister explained this change by saying that different First Nations are at different places right now in terms of their capacity. One size doesn't fit all. And she said they have to support different First Nations where they're at. She said the goal is eventually that you're going to have First Nations self-governing, administering, enforcing their own water laws. They could go above minimum standards if they choose. There would be a new First Nations-led water commission intended to lead this process, working together, being held to account both ways with the federal government. But the other way that this bill is falling short of what some hoped it would continue to uphold is the right to protect source water. So this is not just the water that is in or under First Nations lands. This is water that could be flowing in and around it or contributing to the water supply of a First Nation. The minister said she needed to work on something that, bring forward something that could withstand a challenge in court, stand the test of time in a space where other partners, I think she was meaning provinces here, also have jurisdiction. And this is where the fight comes in terms of considering how this could play out for example, future resource development ambitions, mines and so on, looking for regulatory approval. Instead, this bill talks about the need to collaborate on this sort of thing. Here's more from the minister on that.
Because protecting water, source water, is not just for First Nations people. It's for all Canadians that live across the country. For me, I think the space that we were in politically as a country when C61 was put forward, a little bit different today. One of the other things that I'm very supportive of is in the nature strategy, really that security, that national water security strategy that's being put forward is a double process that really ensures that everybody who's impacted by water in this country participates in ensuring that we are having a comprehensive, harmonized approach to protecting water in its entirety.
All this is going to be helped along with some $4.6 billion in new targeted funding. This is over and above the $2.3 billion that was in last fall's federal budget. The minister said today that of the nearly $15 billion that's been spent since 2015 on First Nations water projects, she said over half were spent by the Carney government over the last year alone, a rebuttal perhaps to suggestions that the Carney government is somehow not taking this seriously. Billy Moran is a Conservative MP from the Edmonton area, notably a First Nations chief before switching to federal politics. He is reacting right now in the foyer of the House of Commons and objecting to the fact, he says, that the Carney government is treating First Nations like a risk to be managed. Here's a little bit more from him just now.
A bureaucracy through a powerless commission. It centralizes power through through the minister's office in Ottawa. It doesn't empower First Nations to actually get tangible things done. She might say that there's the biggest investments ever, but it's non-statute-based funding at the end of the day. Where are we going to be in 5 years? We need to challenge the Liberals to actually say, what is the date that you're going to back up to get these bold water advisories done? Because all I see out of this government is more fluff, and it's part of the course for this Prime Minister. No substance, grand announcements, big money spent, but the results actually go down. And so,
of course, this legislation, much delayed, was promised, for the fall, then the spring, now coming with only days to go before summer recess.
So when you broke this down, you were talking about principles, you were talking about the politics as well. And if we talk about the optics, there was a question too about why there was not a lineup of Indigenous leaders, First Nations communities representatives there with the minister as she made this announcement, wondering whether or not we've had any reaction to that.
Yeah, notably from the Ontario chiefs, because when you look at those 38 long-term water advisories still stubbornly in place, the bulk of them are in Ontario. The Council of Ontario chiefs are meeting at the Rama First Nation right now. We're speaking earlier this morning, actually, about their concern about the Carney government not including them in the development of legislation the way that they believe the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples would suggest they should be co-drafting a key bill like this. Instead, they believe the Carney government very over-focused on resource development right now. Alvin Fiddler, who is the Grand Chief of Anishinaabe Nation, which, if you know the file, a lot of the most difficult water advisories are in First Nations that he represents. He made some comments earlier saying this bill is not perfect, but he called it a starting point, but being concerned that there actually still are not adequate resources to address the true scope of this issue. The Assembly of First Nations National Chief, Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak, was on News Network earlier this morning. And I want to play you a clip from her because she basically flat out said this is legislation that is going to need to be amended to uphold the honor of the Crown. She expressed concern that it's not going to take effect until 1 year after it passes. And she said, look, we could see a lot of resource development approvals in the meantime. Take a listen.
It's silent on water usage. Like, what about data centers or major projects or AI centers or emergency management? I think, however, some of the good thing is there's insurance protection in the bill. There's First Nations Clean Water Commission that will be coming into effect. Of course, there's the money piece of it, which is always welcome because it's just desperately needed.
Notably, though, she too is not concerned that there's enough money here to close the gap. When you're talking about billions of dollars for sort of people outside First Nations, that probably sounds like very large sums. So it's interesting to hear chiefs suggest that, in fact, in their opinion, there still aren't enough resources on the table, notwithstanding the fact that a lot more money has been put against this today. But they're going to have to get not just the money right, but the language of the bill right. And so that remains for the fall. But it sounds like, at least in the view of these chiefs, there are going to be some amendments, some tweaking required.
Okay, thank you for this, Janice. That is the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa.